And the inspiration for what we're doing and what we're going to all talk about is what we think a post-psychedelic future looks like. What does civilization look like if we reintegrate these consciously back into society and acknowledge them not just only as great tools for mental health, but actually great solutioning tools for innovation and pushing society forward. So one of my best friends, Genevieve Jurvetson, who is hands down one of the leaders and most, I think, influential and important philanthropists in the psychedelic movement, has so graciously flown in from San Francisco to come and moderate this with us. My good friend, co-founder Bruce Damer, he's here, he's going to share his story. My good buddy Rick Doblin, he's here as well. Needs no introduction, but I'm really grateful for you all to listen to this panel.
So come get a white chair, because under each chair, Rick Doblin has put a bag of pharmaceutical-grade MDMA, so get your tushes up here.
Well, actually, some of them are placebos, so we're going to try to figure out if you can tell the difference.
So Ford, thank you so much for having us. What a phenomenal conference. The content is just extraordinary. So I feel like the bar is high, and we're the last thing between us and the party. Okay, we will try to keep it spicy. Seriously, come on in, come take a seat.
Yes, sir.
So you heard a little bit from Ford about how psychedelics have been used for scientific breakthroughs. I would love for Bruce to kind of kick us off and share a little bit more about your story and maybe some other famous scientific breakthroughs that have occurred on psychedelics. And then talk a little bit about maybe the mechanism, like what's going on? How is this happening?
What is going on? So first question, an audience poll. After you've had a tremendous experience, perhaps on psychedelics or not, a healing experience, how many of you have felt a kind of release in the body and then also in the mind, and you've entered a creative flow state for several days, right? It's amazing, right? So there's a clue there. And I was following that clue in that I had a hard knot in my belly all my life until my 30s. And it turns out I knew that I was adopted out at birth. So literally as a baby, I was given up into an adoption ward. And through ayahuasca, I finally unbound that knot. Because I didn't have the flow state. I didn't have the access. I was all up here. I was a very autistic little boy when I came home with to my parents who raised me. And ayahuasca allowed me to untie that knot, to birth me, the embryo that was me. And I noticed, having done that work, I was opened up. I was in a high-octane state. And I'd been working in science for years on the question of how did life begin on the Earth 4 billion years ago? Hard question, my lifetime pursuit. And because of this opening of my own birth, the insight into my own birth, I came into a state with ayahuasca where I came with Mama Ayahuasca, if you will, back to the pool, the little warm pool where we were all born in a visionary experience with a relatively small dose of ayahuasca in the Amazon rainforest. I developed a practice, a microdose practice, and it all came one night. It was just the protocells dividing. I was the protocell dividing, ripping myself apart, the stillbirth, and realizing that death wrote the code of life because it had to try and try again to create its offspring, to create daughter cells. And part of my mind, my observer, was very much online since I was a little kid. Autistic kids are like that. Watching the molecular storm and the molecules dance, watching the programming going on as the attempted division was happening. And I came back from that trip and I sketched it all out for my colleague at UC Santa Cruz, and he gave me the Eureka thumb sign. You found the kinetic trap we've been looking for. It went into publication in 2015. It rolled into Scientific American's cover, all those sorts of things. And yet, I didn't want to risk my reputation. So in 2016, the New Yorker called, wanting to do a profile article. Halfway through the interview, I thought, oh my God, if my name is on this, it'll destroy our science. I'll be removed from NASA review boards. It'll be kind of a career-ending thing. I said, can you do it anonymously? And they said, no. And I said, okay, because we're in a conservative field of basically chemistry, full of Nobelists in our field. And 2022, I came out of the closet I said, it's time. The science is in place. We have 20 teams that have adopted our wet-dry cycling. It's changing where NASA drops its rovers on Mars. It's a full paradigm shift out of the oceans to the land. It's done. I'm going to risk a reputation. I'm going to tell the full story, including my protocol of how I prepared for this work, in the hopes that it will bring this tool back online for extraordinary, exceptional insight, both insight into self for my healing, but for the revealing, for future solutions in science, for those postdocs, for some of the greatest solutions in climate change we're going to need, the super complex problems. And I didn't get canceled by my own community. There was this interest in the Nobelists. They were interested in, Damer uses ayahuasca. That's interesting. And it led to the formation of minds, taking that personal risk. So that's where we are. And I have to say that there's huge promise in this area to unlock this type of insight for scientists, designers. There was research until the mid-60s, the very famous Willis Harman study with 23 individual professionals taking mescaline or LSD that's in Michael Pollan's book and the Netflix series. Breathtaking capacities were opened up in those people, in their experience reports that has gone under the table in the last 50 years. And just as therapeutic value is now returning, I think the value for the human intellect, or as Humphrey Osmond and Aldous Huxley called it, outsight into the world. It provides insight into ourselves, but what about outsight into how we are in the world, solutions we can create. So that's the theme for Minds, is bringing that 60-year abandoned thread in psychedelic research back online. And just concluding, we've just announced our first study, 3-year study at UT Austin, Greg Fondo's group, led by Manoj Das, on psilocybin's effect on memory in the scanner. 23 individuals will do memory tests where they record a memory. We can actually watch where it goes when the memory goes in. Does it go in the cortical region or other regions? And then later on, when they're not on psilocybin, they do the recovery of the memory. Where did it come out from? Pretty cool, right? Which hard drive did it go to? Did it go to the thumb drive, or did it go to the network, or whatever? Because it will tell you how to create fluency. Does psilocybin create more fluency, more familiarity, and more divergent cross talk that comes when you're having a download, a huge insight that comes so fast? I think it's that state. So we are just on that first step in the science to what is going on, and to validate that these tools really work, even though we have the anecdotal evidence for decades.
Could I ask you just one question? So what happened in 2022 when you said you were ready to come out about your psychedelics? How did you decide that? Well, what was it that made it seem that was the right time?
I was turning 60, and I thought, you know what? They can't give me, I can't lose tenure because I don't have it. And I just thought that the experience was so precious that if there's another kind of autistic person that is good at visioning out there but feels alone, I was talking to them. I said, you can start out this way, really weird, and you can work your way out of your isolation. And you can bring your superpower that as a result of that isolation, connect with the world, and you can make that internal world into a beautiful expression. If you're a scientist, engineer, or designer, you can get healed, and then you can take all of that into the world. And it's really one thing. And I wanted to be a living example for them. Go on this path. It actually worked.
Yeah. Thank you for your bravery, and the vulnerability. I wanted to double click on something you said, and it's a phrase I love that I've heard Ford say as well, and it's turning the healing into revealing. And what I think is so beautiful about your story is, and for the folks in the audience who maybe like myself are thinking, oh, that's well and good, but I'm probably not going to come up with a theory of life in a psychedelic journey myself. But I think that there's something to be said about unlocking each and every person's potential as a human being. So what I want to talk about more, and maybe I'll turn it to Ford, is this notion of like, until you healed this traumatic experience of growing up as an orphan, you didn't come into this incredible insight and what that means for all humans. So can you talk more about the healing and the revealing and what that means to you and why that work is so important?
Yeah, I had a rare first psilocybin experience where I ate a whole chocolate bar that was like 8 grams by myself, and I can't say I don't recommend it. It actually was everything I needed. It was great. It was terrifying, but it was great. It was exactly what I needed. I think what I realized, for me, I didn't have a download on the theory of relativity or origin of life. I had the download that I was a narcissist, and that clearing up that understanding was probably the single greatest lever I've unlocked in my life. Whenever I went to rehab when I was 17, I took this you take this 200-question test, and I sat down with the dean or whoever of the rehab, and she says, open up the dictionary. And I opened it up, and she said, look up the word narcissist. I'd never heard this word before. I look it up, I read it, totally offends me, and she's like, that's what the test says that you are. And it never really set with me ever. And for whatever it's worth, this is a theory of mine that I've been working on. This show, I'll go public with it. I was put on SSRIs at 15, and I got off them at 26. And I have a thesis around the fact that I think that SSRIs actually create narcissism, because what happens is you get your whole nervous system turns off. So when you tell a white lie, or you embarrass somebody, or you make fun of somebody, you don't actually feel what it feels like a normal person would feel to have that experience. And so through this psilocybin experience, that was the unlock for me, was like, you're a narcissist, you've never actually felt your feelings before, you need to get off the meds, you're never actually going to get to follow your purpose or do what you're going to do in life or what you're destined to do unless you can actually have feeling and insight. So for me, it was, don't have any papers published or anything, but it's catalyzed this experience for, this event.
So, Rick, we're going to take a little bit of a detour, but I feel like you're the best person to kind of address this. You have been at this for 40 years-ish? Okay. And it feels like we're just on, I can see it in the future, that we're going to get an FDA approval for 1, maybe 2 drugs. Something's good's going to happen in this next administration. I can feel it. I hope you guys feel it too. And I see this work, and I see this work around creativity and problem solving, and I worry that it gets categorized a little bit like recreational use, or like a luxurious use case for psychedelics when there are literally veterans killing themselves every day because they can't even find the will to live. How do we thread this needle? How do we ensure that we can use these tools to unlock the human potential in every human while not getting too aggressive in pursuing something that might undermine the other work that's underway?
All right, well, that's a great question. But I would say that the concern about the war on drugs and the people's belief that the war on drugs was necessary is what contributed to blocking psychedelic research for multiple decades. And that was because if there is something positive said about psychedelics or about marijuana, then that might call into question all of these exaggerated risks of psychedelics and marijuana. And so the research into benefits was blocked because of concern about the war on drugs. And what has been happening over the last several decades with the enormous number of people dying from opiate and fentanyl overdoses is that we're seeing that the war on drugs is actually not succeeding. It's really counterproductive. So I guess I would challenge a little bit about what you said, is I think we need to go and very much speak about the counterproductive nature of the war on drugs, both for drug abuse, for national security, for all different aspects of it. And then that creates more space because for positive uses of psychedelics, and what we're trying to do is go through the FDA for very designated indications like PTSD or like depression or like OCD or substance abuse. But most people don't necessarily have a diagnosis, and the kind of creativity that you're talking about does blend over into, quote, more or less healthier people doing these. So I think it makes it easier for people to understand and appreciate this idea of expanding the use cases beyond just treating illness if we also speak about the counterproductive nature of the war on drugs. But I think what people are most needing are examples to believe that this is the case, that it's not a delusion, that it's not a hallucination, that you could actually develop ideas that then check out scientifically. And I think we need to do both of those at the same time. So we need to really do medicine first, I believe, because that is what really changes people's attitudes and gives information about, in certain cases, the benefits outweigh the risks. And then also you can really clarify the risks. So there are people that still believe that one dose of MDMA starts to cause holes in your brain. My wife, when I first met her, this is a long time ago, but this was now in 1989, and we had our first discussion. She didn't think it was a date. I thought it was a date, but it was a lunch. And afterwards, she wanted to talk to me about a mushroom trip she had at college. And then she said, I would never want to have a real relationship with anybody like you. And I'm like, well, why is that? She said, well, it's because you've done so much LSD, your chromosomes are all screwed up. And I said, it might be premature, but let me defend my sperm. It's really, and we do have 3 healthy children. But the point of that story is smart people believe stupid stuff. And they believe the propaganda. And how do you get over that? By the science, and in particular with the medicine. And then that expands. So the research that was done by Willis Harman and others, where they did psilocybin, this is with Jim Fadiman also, they did psilocybin to help people solve intellectual problems. And they got tremendous results from that. But that research hasn't really started up yet again. We started again with medicine, with treatment of illness. And then also we're starting to question now, should these drugs be illegal for other things that are really important? So I think it's a parallel path. We don't have to worry about stepping on this landmine of talking about drug policy reform. And also, one of our fundraisers was gay, and what he said was during the 80s, when a lot of their friends were dying from AIDS, he said they worked out their grief with ecstasy on the dance floor. So when we use the word recreational, we tend to say, oh, that's reckless, that's heedless, that's not beneficial, that's somehow frivolous, and we can criminalize that, it doesn't matter. But even these distinctions, what's therapeutic, what's recreational, what's creative, there's not such clear boundaries between these different lines. Even as you were saying, Bruce, this idea of you work through trauma, and then it opens you up to insight. Yeah. So it just is a great example. These are not separate categories. And so I think we need to really start moving into understanding creativity and psychedelics. And the FDA has a path for that, which are called academic studies. So one part of the FDA is drug development studies, where you want to make drugs into a medicine. But the other is you could just study whatever you want. It doesn't have to be drug development. So you can get permission for academic studies. We're talking about doing a study for MDMA for couples therapy. That will start as an academic study. And so that's where I think you should be able to get permission to do some of these studies and not have all these people frightened that you're now talking about legalization necessarily. But I do have...
Something gets lost when you have to have a diagnosis to benefit from these tools.
Yeah, totally.
I think it's so useful for family therapy, couples therapy, and what a shame to leave that on the table, but... Yeah.
And there's a story I just wanted to share that I learned. I was just in Iceland. Brian Hubbard was there in Iceland at the psychedelic conference. I don't know if it's gotten back to you yet, but this was a guy who had an insight under DMT. Yes. And so
I was with him in Miami this past week. This is the Tim Ferriss story. Well, you missed the intro because you were late. But this is the physicist that
yes.
Tim Ferriss told me about 3 years ago. We can't say his name, but yes.
Yeah, well, he's getting ready to come out because he's been worried. But the insight was that under DMT, he had this entity that was sort of talking to him, and the words were light without time. Somehow light without time. And he was not a physicist at all, but he got all these other messages, and then he sort of started becoming more involved in physics. And then he developed little kind of improvements to the general theory of relativity, and he worked on warp drive. Mm-hmm. And so he showed me this whole page of all of these formulas, except, which basically were meaningless to me. But he had a few little figures, and one was a figure, and he said, what I figured out in warp drive, in these theories of warp drive, is that certain shapes do better, have less friction, and the shape that he showed was the flying saucer shape. He said that's from his calculations is the best way to do warp drive, these flying saucers. But the point was that he spoke to other Nobel Prize winners too, some of them, and others have had DMT insights that they don't talk about. So that's where you coming out and saying that will create space for other people to do that. And this fella, what I was saying is, they might think it was crazy, your story of where you got this insight, but focus them then on the insights. That's what they have credibility. The fact that your insights have been accepted by other physicists, been published, that's what you start with. And then you can say people will listen to how you got the insight. If you start with the insight, they'll think you're nuts. But if you start with how you got the insight, they think you're nuts. But you start with the thing that you learned, then people can buy into that. And then, so have you found that the case, that you haven't had much people sort of try to challenge your ideas because they came from this kind of psychedelic state?
I waited long enough that it was sort of secure. And in fact, there was a moment in May of 2022 when I counted, like, the ResearchGate and Google reports were a citation a day for our hypothesis, and it was coming from all over. So we were getting hundreds of citations a year in these other articles, and I said, okay, we are set. I checked with Dave, my scientific mentor and elder. Look, Dave, this is where this insight came. I told him the whole story over tea in his living room, and he's a really open-minded guy. You know, he's 85 years old, but he said, yeah, you want to tell that story if you think it'll benefit future science and help guide innovation in our field. And so I did the public talk, and then 3 weeks later, a Nobelist called him and said, oh, I hear Damer uses ayahuasca. You know, and this is a very conservative individual, one of the world's great RNA chemists. And I said, okay, Dave, what, the other shoe drop? You know, what was the comment? You know, what happened? He said, no, we just went on and we just talked about other things. I said, wow, we have crossed the Rubicon here, because that is a person that I would never have expected to have other than, because in our field we have a long history all the way back to the 19th century of visionary thinkers. You know, Crick, for instance, using LSD to not visualize the structure of DNA, but how it expresses proteins. Right? He was a heavy user of LSD. And then Carrie Mullis, who, using LSD multiple times, retrained and reformatted his mind so that when it came down to the download about polymerase chain reaction, which is how do you sequence genes, like a fundamental invention, he had the acuity at that point to ride on a molecule of DNA as it split up and went through the pores into a PCR process. And he describes this very well. So he wasn't on LSD, but LSD reformatted his powers of visualization. And yet, as late as just after his Nobel Prize, he was, you know, in our conferences, I heard people say, oh, that druggie Carrie Mullis, you know, disparaging him, sort of trying to isolate him, because he didn't describe this until after his Nobel Prize. So it's a shift. A shift has occurred.
Yeah, no, Carrie was a supporter of MAPS too, and he gave us one of my favorite quotes that we used in some of our PR materials. So Carrie Mullis, after he gets the Nobel Prize, says, I think I would have been stupid in some respects if it weren't for my LSD experiences.
Mm-hmm. It's extraordinary. One of the things that comes to mind as I think about all these people, voices coming out of the closet, is how important it is that we're thoughtful about which voices it is. Like, if I came up with a theory of life, people would be scratching their heads, but you had an incredible career prior to that moment that really credentialized you. And I think about Casey and Callie Means and Dr. Mark Hyman, and how these are people who are leading disruptive change, but from a place of a lot of expertise, education, and credibility. So I think we need to be extra thoughtful about what voices we bring forward and at the right time. So I think we're getting to the end of the 30 minutes.
5 minutes left.
Oh, we have 5 minutes left. Well, you know what? My last question is going to take 5 minutes. So I would love for each of you to comment on what do you hope, if you had an ask of this audience, and is there any kind of parting thought you would love to leave with this group of change makers?
Ask. We have a party this evening supporting MAPS and Minds. Minds is the nonprofit that Bruce and I started. And it's going to be a blast. It's at Mohawk. It's from 5 to 11. All proceeds go to both organizations. And then the thing that I'd like to leave everybody with is, I think, I think there was a question you were going to ask earlier, and it had something to do with, like, how do we avoid what happened in the 60s, and I think, a lot of the movement was around this, like, idea of world peace and what these, like, medicines could do for society. And I always question, I believe that firmly. Like, I think that's probably the single greatest lever we could pull as a society, is making sure that these are integrated back into society. And every time I talk about the idea or the concept of world peace, people scoff, and I think that, maybe you'll come around at some point. So I think I'd like to, encourage people to, like, just think that these things could actually be possible. Because if we can't even imagine that they're going to be possible, it's going to be a lot harder to do. And I think that these tools, when we came up with Minds, it took a long time for me to actually convince people of what we were doing with the organization. And it's still to this day, we've got to kind of dial in our messaging. But at the end of the day, I thought, okay, if psychedelics are the greatest lever we can pull to, like, hopefully achieve this, like, lofty dream of world peace, like, I'm a marketer, like, how do I market psychedelics better, right? And I had this idea that's like, if psychedelics continue to fall in this Western medicalized model, nothing wrong with that at all right now, that's why we're here, that we're still losing a large percentage of the population that's just not subscribing to it. Like, they're not gonna test for anxiety, depression, PTSD in the future, and they're gonna be like, they're not for me. And I personally believe that we could all benefit from some form of an altered state experience, whether it's breath work, LSD, or whatever, meditation. And so I think that the point I'm getting at is that we're all talking about the same thing. Whether you're having a breakthrough in the origin of life or you're having a breakthrough about your early childhood trauma, it's all an insight. Whether it's my narcissism or it's the theory of relativity, like, it's all, like, highly impactful, and it's about what you do with that experience and how you bring it back into society. And so I really think that, like, for me, the last ayahuasca experience I had, the message I got was, it's 1%. The experiences is 1% medicine. Is 99% what you do after the experience. If you don't do anything with it, it's just a crazy trip, So, yeah, that's my wisdom, I guess. I don't know.
Okay, well, the part of the world peace, to build on that. So the idea for me that I believe is possible, I've talked about net zero trauma by 2070. And so it's multiple generations away. It's this idea that over the next probably 20 years, there's an estimate, if climate change is not really mitigated, there could be over 1 billion new refugees running from climate where they no longer are able to sustain themselves. So there's going to be more and more trauma. So this idea of net zero trauma by 2070 just means we're not adding to the burden of trauma, both multi-generational epigenetic trauma and stuff that people experience. So it's, first off, globalized thinking of humanity as a whole, and then it's to how do we really help people's filters be cleaned. So that's, for me, the vision that I'm suggesting that we try to inhabit. But as far as a call to action, you might think, as founder and president of a nonprofit, my main thing would be money, donations. But it's not. I've got this idea based on, Bruce, what you said before about coming out. So you look at successful social change movements. In particular, now we have gay marriage, gay rights, although they're under attack in certain ways. But what made that happen was people coming out. So my request to everybody is to think about, if you've had positive psychedelic experiences, even if you've had difficult psychedelic experiences that you didn't think were beneficial, but particularly if you've had beneficial psychedelic experiences, to come out and to talk to people who might not agree with that. And that's what we really need, to destigmatize more people who speak to each other, speak to their families, speak to their parents. And a lot of the polling that's been done on the legalization of marijuana, which will hopefully one day come to Texas here, but the polling has demonstrated that one of the most important reasons why somebody votes for legalizing marijuana is if they know a medical marijuana patient, because they'll trust somebody that they know, and they don't know about all this other information. So for people to come out about their psychedelic experiences, you are incurring potential reputational risk. But I think that it's worth it. And I think that each of you have to examine what is the reputational risk that you face. One of the most amazing ones was Elizabeth Koch, whose father is Charles Koch. She did underground MDMA therapy because she felt that she was traumatized growing up, because she was told people are only going to want you for your money, you can never trust anybody. And she talked about it in the New York Times, did an interview with Elizabeth Koch, and that had such an impact. So for each of us to think about the people that listen to us, the people that we care about, I would just encourage you to think about sharing what you felt might be too controversial or dangerous to share in the past. That's what will really change culture.
I kind of live in a alternate universe in that part of my consciousness is back in that warm little pool 3 billion years ago with the deepest ancestors. I'm constantly running their program and asking questions about them, and then imagining how they helped to create a garden world. So life was so powerful. It got started and it transformed the atmosphere. The geology gave us breathable air and allowed plants, animals, and fungi to grow. It was a super powerful force, and it is still on the move. And the way it got powerful is because it had deleterious, almost fatal stresses put on it. Asteroid impacts, fires, desertification, global freeze-overs, slamming against the living world, and the life responded and became more robust, and innovation happened. Here we are such an impact on the biosphere that we're bringing it all down at once. Climate change, denudation of the land, transformation of the atmosphere, all of that. Because there's such a powerful metabolizer, we're metabolizing previous organisms that were buried underground in oil, and we're doing this all at once. But what that's doing is it's bringing us tremendous capacity, AI and chips, for example, new tools. It turns out our minds respond to these simple molecular structures and go into extraordinary states, and yet this enormous wave of stress is coming on our civilization. And I think it's all part of pushing us to the next evolution, maturing us, growing us up, making us have better tools, caring about the entire planet instead of just our own little local area. And this is what this 21st century is going to be about. And one little simple example of this is AI. I thought it's just a chat bot and everything 2 years ago. It's just a toy. Now, it's like, it's the hand axe for the mind. AI is the psychedelic ramification of compute space. It's a thing out there that is a divergent thinking, massively associative, trippy entity that perfectly fits hand in glove into our minds. And if our minds are sort of psychedelically trained, we can interact with it more fully. So I've been throwing the origin of life question at Deep Sea and Grok, and saying, hey dude, here's a square centimeter of polymer, and here's 1 trillion molecules attached to it. How fast are they moving? How many encounters per second? And it's like 20 trillion encounters per second. Would a ribozyme occur in this combinatorial engine? And DeepSeek is like, it's virtually instantaneous. And we're having this dialogue back and forth. 70 pages of math came out. My brain is hugely stretched. Like, really? Well, cite the papers. Boom. And I said, you're hallucinating on that, brother. Like, and it came back like, Elon's in there somewhere. Like, yeah, you're hallucinating on this over here, And it's a fantastic partnership. And I realized, oh my God, we have created a thing that is like a psychedelic insight genius partner just in time for the most complex wave of problems that's self-created, that is coming like a tsunami. And thank you, Mother Nature. It always shows up. The tool at the right time shows up, and we can just punch through that tsunami that's coming. And we come out the other side. It's like, oh wow, here we are at evolution. It's like we look down at where we were in 2000 and 2025. It's like we've kind of grown up a little bit more. Our brains are better, our hearts are better. We've done it, and hopefully minimized our casualties and not succumbed to the overwhelm. So I think that this is all part of what evolution has been doing for almost 4.2 billion years, and we're just part of it. If we own that, we say, hey, we are the stewards of life on Earth from this point on. We're doing things so fast that Mama Guy said, here's a car keys, brother, because you're running Evolution now. We can't respond fast enough. It's over to you, and we'll decide that we are responsible. We are the stewards of ongoing complex life on the planet. It's us, and we'll finally sort of wake up to like, wow, it's a cool responsibility, and we got to care for it.
Thank you, Bruce. I would love to be a fly on the wall when you're interacting with DeepSeek. So I just wanted to first my closing thoughts are thank you to you and Sylvia for this incredible event.
Yeah, thank you, my lovely wife.
You guys really built something special here, and I just feel honored to be amongst so many people. The audience is as impressive as people who have been speaking today. So thank you. My parting thought is, it feels like there's something very special underway in this country. We're in very turbulent times that could go really well or could be the end of times. And to think about, if you found yourself here today, you're probably passionate about what everyone's working here, whether it's MAHA or the Don't Die movement. Try and figure out, like, what is that thing inside of you that you can contribute to what's going on? And maybe these tools will help you find that purpose, maybe not. But I think we need help. We need passionate, smart people to work on MAHA or work on other adjacent efforts and come along for the ride.
Stay seated, stay seated. This will be quick. Up next, we have coffee, more drinks, and a DJ, which means it's time to hang out. I just want to thank the party planners involved in this. Ford and I were chatting like 3 weeks ago, and we said to Lindsay on the Arena team, hey, what if we had a few friends come over for some fireside conversations on this important topic? And then I think it was close to 300 people that made today an amazing event. Unbelievable speakers. Thank you guys so much. This panel, the previous panels, for being with us. Ford and I feel like we're at the beginning of, I think, a small piece of a really big movement. What Lindsay and I at Arena are trying to figure out is how do we convene events, bring the right people together, create the context for conversations. We have some fun real estate projects happening in Austin where we might get some cool, even bigger, cool facilities to do this, but in a bigger, better way. Ford is thinking together, we're thinking about how do we find the companies that need capital, how do we find LPs and family offices that want to fund and be a part of this movement. And with the studio, Ford's building, hey, how do we find entrepreneurs who 10 years ago, the best engineers out of Stanford did not want to go into health tech. Now, tons go into health tech. Now today, how do we get the best engineers in the world to say, here's where MAHA and the movement is going, how do we invite them to build companies and have them be alongside leaders in the industry who can coach them on how to build companies that are going to work and how they can scale. We had 2 multi-billion-dollar companies up right before I opened 5 years from now. There's dozens, all built in Austin, that'll be a part of that. So that's part of stuff that you're working on. I want to brainstorm with us on how to do that. Come find us. We're going to be here, and with that, I want to thank the Ultranative team, Sylvia, Sina, the Arena Hall team, and a round of applause to this panel. Thanks for being here. Don't leave. Bye, guys.